The 1920s market featured the American lifestyle, which at the time was materialistic, which led people to be consumerist. It was believed that everybody should have their own cars and have a lot of money in their big houses. This led a lot to consumer debt because everybody wanted to have the American lifestyle. They wanted to have a lot of materials that would flaunt themselves as wealthy. The 1920s market featured such things as flappers, and this materialism is shown in such things as like The Great Gatsby. This time period featured four major tariffs. The first one was the 1857 tariff, which had the lowest tariff seen. It had 17% taxation, and it led directly to the Panic of 1857. The second one is the 1861 tariff, which raised to 38% to avoid such things as the panic. It also supported the Civil War, and three-quarters of the Civil War was funded by tariffs. The third tariff was the tariff of 1913, which is where Wilson lowered the tariff from 40% to 25%. The fourth and final tariff is the tariff of 1930, which had 60% taxation, which created trade protectionism, although this truly deepened the global depression going on at the time. Canals at the time allowed for national unity. It allowed steamships to travel anywhere from New York to Ohio and down the Mississippi River. This is the reason that New York became such an epicenter of business and trade. People found that it was cheaper to head up to New York and then to ship their stuff to Ohio rather than heading over to Ohio directly. This is still shown today, where New York is one of the largest business districts in America. Railroads at the time truly unified the nation. This was due to the invention of the steam engine. It dropped shipping costs in America from 60 to 70% of what it was before. This also led to many new immigrations, such as the Chinese immigration, which will be talked about later. The invention of the automobile also unified the nation as a whole. This increased due to the moving assembly line. The invention of the automobile increased demand for suburban housing because people could now live outside of the city and still come into the city for work. This also allowed people to escape rural isolation, where before they were truly stuck within their community because they had no means of transportation. The telegraph truly changed the communication between different countries and nations. Also within the nation, it allowed people to relay messages between each other, also outside the country. Before, it was truly dependent on such things as the Pony Express, and now things could be communicated at an instant rate. The invention of photography was the first to capture many scenes. This was shown throughout the war and through many harsh working conditions, whereas before it was all truly word of mouth, but now there was factual proof of terrible working conditions and the severity of war. This also changed the face of journalism and how different stories would be conveyed. The invention of the atomic bomb was greatly severe throughout the whole world. It was more destructive than any bomb that had been previously created. This left many people with a moral dilemma, such as Truman. The whole world was left in fear because they didn't know who was going to be next to be bombed. This fear would inevitably lead to the Cold War. The abolition of slavery was obviously a big impact on the source of labor, because before the abolition, slavery was America's main source of work and labor. This led to sharecropping, which still had many like former slaves still reporting to a higher power, but they still had legality behind it. This also led to the Great Migration of African Americans to northern states, especially to Harlem, which would start the Harlem Renaissance. During this time period, there was a great change in immigration. Before, there was a large immigration of African Americans brought in to be slaves, but now there was different ethnicities coming in for labor. Um, the Chinese were the main source of labor now. They came in to mostly work on the railroad system to find jobs. There was great discrimination against them, and this was supposed to be solved in the Burlingame Treaty, but that truly solved nothing because there was a great amount of Chinese discrimination going on throughout the country at the time, where many people would not hire Chinese. This led to the Chinese Exclusion Act, which allowed for no Chinese to immigrate into America for 10 years following. Organized labor through this time is shown by the creation of unions. There were many radicals at this time, including Eugene v. Debs, which apparently is not a court case like I thought. Eugene v. Debs led many protests, but what some would call riots. He was in prison and basically came out as a socialist. He was inspired by Karl Marx. There was also the Knights of Labor at this time, who were basically the center figure for unions. The Knights of Labor, basically their goal was to create a cooperative society in which laborers like own the industries that they worked at, because they just wanted labor and management to get along. Industrial life throughout this time period was also greatly different than the lifestyle that Americans had been living previously. So expansion of the daily life was a major thing where people started beginning to transport between their house and work, where before you would work out of your house. This meant that cities would be growing in size, and that cities also featured living, but also work environments too. The work environments at first were very harsh, and they were a very dangerous place to be with very few safety regulations. That would change throughout this time period, and towards the end, we began to see many safety regulations put into place.